Every January, 150 brave souls set out to complete 135 miles either on foot, skis, or a bike on rugged snow and ice covered trails leading from the nation's icebox of International Falls down to Tower, located in Minnesota's Iron Range, just south of Canada. Now, in this area, this time of year, temperatures can fall to negative 30 and 40 degrees below zero. Participants struggle to stay warm, avoid frostbite, and just to survive. Because of this, the race organizers require participants to carry certain gear, such as a negative 20 sleeping bag, a bivy sack, a sleeping pad, food, water, a stove, a GPS locator, and other survival items. The race starts in the dark. It lasts about 2 days. They don't let just anybody enter this race. You have to have a history of completing ultra marathons and know how to deal with the extremely cold weather. And even with this, only about 50% of the people who enter actually complete the race. We're going to talk to a buddy of mine, Ajay Picket, who just completed the race for the first time, and we're going to discuss with him his experience. A couple of years ago, I saw a great documentary called 40 Below, the toughest race in the world. And it was about the Arrowhead 135, which is a race in northern Minnesota, and it was in extreme cold temperatures. It's a great film. In fact, you can download it from Amazon Prime right now, and I highly recommend that you do that. But I watched this film, and I thought, man, these guys are a little crazy. But honestly, there was a little part of me that said, yeah, I think I want to do that. But luckily enough for me, they don't let just any old moron like me get in this race. You have to have a history of running in ultra races, 100-mile races, and have a history with being in the cold and surviving the elements up there in that type of a race. So today we're going to be talking with a friend of mine who I've chatted with multiple times about different hiking trails. We kind of get the intel of, hey, you just hiked the Centennial Trail. What's it like? You just hiked this trail. What's it like? And he's a real good guy that is great for that intel. But he's also been a thru hiker. He's done FKTs, fastest known times. He's a ultra runner. And so he definitely had the resume to do this. And if you recognize him, he's also good friends with Darwin on the trail. So maybe you've seen him in some of Darwin's videos. But I'm going to bring in Ajay Picket, better known as Juice. And Juice just completed the Arrowhead 135. And he came in 12th place. You're a monster, man. How you doing?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on, Jeremy.
Yeah. So you're a few weeks out from the race. How's the body feeling?
Feeling pretty good. I'm getting back to feeling like my old self. It took a while. That first week is it's pretty brutal. When you finish a race like this, it's just there's a lot of recovery. At least for me, I kind of feel like a deep fatigue. The muscles are sore, just kind of tired all the time. But after, a good week, body starts to recover more, start to feel more like yourself. And let's just say I'm getting there. Not fully back, but in a better spot.
So before we get into talking more about the race and your experience competing in the race, can you tell us a little bit about just your backpacking and running history?
Sure. So I would say I kind of got into backpacking, ultra running kind of later in life. I didn't go on my first backpacking trip until I was in college. I was probably a sophomore in college. So that would have probably been around maybe 2005, 2006. Went up had some buddies that invited me on a trip, and we went up to the Porkies and, did the old, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, borrowed a backpack, had, 60 pounds worth of gear, a different change of clothes for every single day, and had a great time. But that wasn't really where it started. So, that was my first experience to backpacking, but I don't think I was left with this, like, I'm going to do this all the time type of mentality. But
Mhm.
when I got more into my career, I had a buddy that I met, and he did kind of the Boundary Waters, kind of did like a once a year trip. So he invited me to go along one year, and it just became one of this, like, an annual Boundary Waters trip. But then I think we both started thinking about what else we could do with that, because the Boundary Waters were great, but we were like, well, backpacking is kind of similar, like maybe we should start backpacking. And then we started looking up trails, and we found out about the Superior Hiking Trail. And you go down the YouTube rabbit hole, and you start watching
Mhm.
people like Shug and other people in the Midwest, and you're like, oh, there's these trails that are really close to us. We could just we could go through hike it, we could go section hike it. So that's where it started, and it just kind of natural progression. We get out, we struggle, and then we start doing more research on gear and how to be more comfortable, how to be more efficient, and we ended up section hiking the whole Superior Hiking Trail and had a great time doing it. We did it over just over a year, and then it was like, well, maybe I'll come back and through hike it. So then it just kind of evolved from there. And then we started pushing the miles and things like that, where you're like, okay, well, we're doing. I remember very specifically one of the first trips on the Superior Hiking Trail. We came to this intersection after what's it called, the drain pipe. Is that
Mhm.
right? Yeah, the
Yep.
drain pipe. And this was back when the drain pipe was like didn't have any
No
boards or
steps.
anything like that.
Yeah.
So we did the drain pipe. And we were like, oh man, that was a beast. And we get to the top, and there's this guy through hiking the trail, and he was sitting there making ramen on this little bench. And we started talking to him because we were all pretty wiped, and we just started talking to him. He's like, we're like, oh, hey, like, how many miles are you doing today? And he's like, oh, I'm doing 13. And we were like, whoa, 13 miles? Like, this dude is a beast. So that was just kind of that, like, that stuck with both of us. We're like, maybe we could do that. So we started
Yeah.
just kind of pushing the miles, and we did 13, 15, 18, and I think we got up to 25, and we're like, this is pretty good. I think we're doing some pretty good miles.
Yeah.
So then that kind of just evolves from there a little bit, where you're like, okay, well, if I can backpack 25 miles in a day, there's this ultra running thing that's kind of got a lot of people, crazed about it. So maybe I could try that. So then it just became one of those like, well, maybe I'll try 50K. So I signed up for the Spring Superior 50K. I did that. And then you kind of get plugged into, the community, the ultra running community. You're like, oh, you did a 50K. Can you do a 50 mile? And then you do a 50 mile, and you're like, well, can I do 100K? And then you go to 100K, and then you transition to 100 miles. So it just kind of becomes one of those, you just slowly level up with your own, kind of comfort level.
Sure.
So that's kind of how I got, transition from backpacking to ultra running. And then I eventually got back into backpacking kind of through ultra running, because I wanted
Okay.
to do, it's a pretty popular race. It's the Fall Superior 100 miler,
Hmm.
and starts up in, this is starting in Lutzen. Trying to remember where it starts. But anyway, I wanted to get
Yeah.
into it. It's a lottery system. I didn't get into the race. And I was like, well, I still want to go do something like this. So why don't I try for the FKT, which is fastest known time on the
Hmm.
Superior Hiking Trail? And I'll just plan to go southbound, because the race, the Superior 100, goes northbound. And I'll
Hmm.
time it to be on the trail at the same time, because I had a lot of friends that were running the race. So I was like,
Sure.
hey, then I can cross people, give high fives. And to be
Yeah.
honest, that was a huge part of the FKT, one of the most fun days, because at the
Yeah.
beginning of the day, it was just that day where it's like the crux day, where I was just feeling low, feeling like I
Yeah.
couldn't keep going. And then you
Yeah.
see people that that are running a 100-mile race going the other way, and you're like cheering them on, you're giving them high
Yeah.
fives, and like it's such like a good motivator just selfishly for yourself, because like you just
Yeah.
have that human contact, that human engagement again. Where on an FKT,
Yeah.
you're just by yourself. So it's just nice to have that interaction, and that kind of
Yeah.
pump you up type of mentality.
And you could say to them, "Hey guys, you're only going 100 miles. Come on, pick it up."
Well, I had some people. There was some surprising rudeness and kind of entitlement on the trail that I didn't.
Really?
Yeah, just kind of like, well, I'm doing a 100-mile race. Get out of my way. And I was like, well, I'm doing the whole thing faster than you'll do the.
Yeah.
My pace will be faster on the FKT than yours will be on the 100-miler. So,
Yeah.
but it's just the entitlement was kind of a weird part of it that I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting. Not everybody, but there was definitely some people that I'm doing something really hard and you better get out of my way. It's like, okay,
Hmm.
fine.
Yeah. I've been up there a couple times during that race, and I'm happy to say I didn't experience that, but You know, with any sort of group, there's always going to be a couple exceptions
Oh
that
yeah.
are maybe not great. So how many ultras have you done?
I don't know. I kind of lose
A
track
lot.
of them. I've done the Spring Superior 50 miler 4 times, I think. I've done
Okay.
Wild Duluth, 100K. I've done it's the 50 milers. Most of them have been local.
Okay.
Most of my races have been, in Minnesota. I did do the Black Hills 100 and things like that, and that's kind of what spurred the FKT on the Centennial because I didn't know about the trail, but I went out and ran the 100 miler out in South Dakota, and just heard about this Centennial Trail, and I was like, well, I did a good chunk of it on the race, so why don't I come back and bring some buddies along, and we'll try to do it fast and establish the FKT. So that's where they kind of
Sure.
spurred that on.
So the Arrowhead 135 is a completely different monster. I would guess most of your other ultras were in the summer,
Hmm.
and this is at the peak of winter in one of the coldest places in the world. So why did you want to do the Arrowhead 135?
It's kind of one of those notorious races. Like it's got a reputation of being super difficult. And I guess the point where I'm at, I wouldn't say a hardcore endurance runner right now. It's something that I'm still interested in, but not something that I'm doing, 5, 6 races a year like I used to. So I think right now, just in order to do a race, it has to be one that just, it has to be really challenging and really have that like can I do it type of thought process to it, because if it doesn't have that like can I complete it, I guess at this point I have other things that I'm doing that maybe are more that I find more interesting and more fun. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
what needs to be that race where I'm like, ooh, this is going to be brutal and I'm not sure if I can do it, and that's kind of some of the motivation that makes me want to do a race like Arrowhead. And before Arrowhead, I didn't have really a lot of winter experience. Like I've done winter camping and things like that, but I've never run a race in the winter time. So that was part of the allure, is kind of stepping outside of my comfort zone and doing something that
Sure.
I'd never done.
Sure. So how did you prepare for the race?
Sure. I mean, that's it. That's kind of been a learning curve over the years of, backpacking with through hiking with ultra running, is that you kind of learn how to train. And I've never had any, professional coaching or anything like that, which I'm sure, I could have benefited from. But just by learning through my own mistakes, I think I finally figured out how best for me to train. So, I mean, I think I started maybe 4 months before the race and just kind of built up incrementally, putting on extra miles, building on, extra days and things like that. So I think I started maybe, working out 2 to 3 days a week, mixing in, weightlifting, mixing in running and things. And then I built up, probably after that first 30 days to kind of being working out probably 6 days a week. So that kind of consisted of uh, short runs, long runs, and then kind of weightlifting in the gym and things like that. So kind of my routine was I would do 3 shorter runs, which were kind of 10-mile, more sprint runs, kind of around maybe 7 minute miles. And then I do that 3 times a week. And then I would do one long run or a long hike. So I'd go out to Afton just because it's close to my house. You can get some pretty decent elevation. And I would do between 30 and 50 miles in a day as kind of my long day. And then I'd have 2 strength training days at the gym. So that was kind of my 6 day routine, is kind of sprinkling in, an alternate of, those type of things.
So this race is a little bit different than a lot of the ultras that you competed in, not only because it's cold, but they require you to bring some gear along. Maybe if you can talk a little bit about what gear you're required to bring and why they do that.
Sure, sure. So that was one of the biggest learning curves, is, what gear do you not only need, but what gear do you want while you're on the trail? So there's a pretty long list of gear that you need. And that's just for your own safety, because in a race like this, in most ultras, the ability to tap out is pretty easy. There's quite a few aid stations that are scattered every, 10 to 12 miles, and there's lots of people on the trail. And if you want to bail, it's just as simple as saying, well, I think I'm done, whether that's via injury or fatigue or, it's just not your day. You have that option to tap out pretty easily. But in a race like Arrowhead, over 135 miles, there's only 3 aid stations, so they're roughly 35 miles apart. And there's just not a lot of people. There's only about 200 people that do this race. So, for the most part, when you're on the trail, you're kind of by yourself. And if you want to tap, there's only 2 or 3 snowmobile crews that are out there. So if there's other people that are in trouble or there's a storm that blows in, if you want to tap and you're in between aid stations, you could be out there from, an hour or two, or you could be up there, 6 to 7 hours if there's, an issue with getting to you. So 6 or 7 hours at minus 40 below, you better have some really good gear because you're not just going to be able to sit there and wait for rescues. So the ability to kind of, do this race self-supported, and if you get in trouble, be able to, in a sense, self-rescue is a big part of it. So you have to
Mhm.
have a sleeping bag that is minus 20 or better rated, and that's something that they check at gear check. You have to have a certain size sleeping pad. You have to have a bivy sack system. That's kind of one of the big important things because bivvies are super easy to set up, roll out, and then quickly get in. Where like a tent or hammock or something like that is going to be something that takes a few more steps. And if you already can't feel your hands or you're really struggling in the cold, every second really counts, for you to get into your sleep system. So that's why a bivy is, you don't have to use a bivy, but it has to be something that's on par with that or better.
Sure. And I know like a stove for melting water and
Yep.
things like
So
that.
yeah, with this race, you portion your water. So that's one of the things that you have at every one of the aid stations is warm water. So I
Mhm.
didn't have to boil out on the trail. As long as you keep a decent pace going and you planned your water right, you can just use the water and then refill at the aid stations. But I did bring Esbit cubes just in case. So Esbit,
Okay.
a little titanium Esbit stove, some Esbit cubes. So just in case if you get in trouble and you need to boil
Yeah.
water, you have that as a fail safe. But Esbit is, it's tried and true. You can light it in any conditions, but it's just not the most efficient. So if you're looking to boil a bunch of
Sure.
water and really utilize it as part of your race strategy, it's not the
Yeah.
most efficient setup. But if you don't plan on using it, it's one of the most lightweight setups. So that's the decision that I went with. But there's all sorts of other gear that you need from blinkies that you need
Mhm.
on your sleds on the front and the back because it's on a snowmobile trail, and snowmobiles go fast, and a lot of times snowmobilers are bar hopping and things like that, and
Oh,
if you're going in the middle of the night, somebody's going 70 miles an hour on these snowmobile trails, you don't want to be a bug on their windshield. So that's a big part of it is having reflective material on you. You have to have a certain amount of it. You have to have blinkies on your sled on the front and the back, so just so you're visible to people that are on the trail because they don't want any accidents
sure.
happening or anything like that. So food's a big part of it, the cold weather gear is a big part of it, the visibility is a big part of it. So that's why you have to carry something like, if you're doing it on foot, 99% of people that do it on foot, they pull a polk sled because that's
Yeah.
really the most efficient way to be able to pull all of your gear. Because if you're able to load that up in a backpack with all your, minus 20, minus 40 rated stuff, that gets really heavy and, takes up a lot of volume. So not the best use
Yeah.
to use a backpack in a race like this.
So, how much water did you carry? And maybe if you can also get into nutrition.
Sure.
Obviously, you need a lot of calories. And when it's that cold out, you don't want something that's going to be rock hard from freezing.
Yep. Yep, for sure. So, my water strategy is I carried like a running vest that had a hydration bladder in it. So it was 2 liter. And then the key to that is keeping your water from freezing. That's one of the most challenging things in a race like this is the colder it is, the tougher it is to keep your water from freezing. So I use just a standard 2 liter type of flask, and then it has a hose. And most of the time, when you wear like a running vest, you just have the hose running over your shoulder, and then you kind of hook it here, and then you just take sips when you need to. Or some people use soft flasks on the front and things like that. But in a race like this, that's not really possible because that would freeze. So instead of taking the hose and putting it over your shoulder, you put one layer on, and then you put the running vest on with your hydration bladder, and then you take the hose and you put it under your armpit. That way
Mhm.
it insulates the hose with your body temperature, and then you run it up through here, and then I put at least 2 layers on top of that. That's the way it's insulating the your water from freezing. So that was only 2 liters, and that wasn't quite enough to get me between aid stations. So I also had, just kind of like an insulated thermos that was, I think, 40 ounces, double wall insulated, that I just kept in my sled. So when I ran out of my hydration flask, then I would switch over to this 2 liter bottle, or 2 liter bottle, 40 ounce bottle.
Sure. So, as far as food, what what were you
Food,
doing?
food was kind of a challenge, but I'm pretty well versed in high calorie type type foods that I enjoy on the trail. But still, you're adding in the element of freezing because there's food that works on regular backpacking that won't work on a race like this. So you do a lot of research and you find out what other people have done. But when it comes to nutrition, you can't just take what other people say as fact, because that may work for them, but it may not work for you. Because a big part of keeping the calories in on a race like this is eating things that you actually want to eat. Because if it's a
Mhm.
struggle and it's something you don't like, but it's high
Mhm.
calorie, sitting there and
Mhm.
trying to just chow it down and it doesn't feel good just is not, it's not fun. And you're just eating to eat, where you want to have something that, keeps you more motivated. So some of the big things that I used for nutrition were, it's kind of funny, double cheeseburgers. So that was a part of my strategy. So double cheeseburgers, they don't freeze solid.
Where
So
from?
McDonald's.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so that's actually funny that a lot of people that do Arrowhead on foot bring double cheeseburgers because they're calorie dense, they're
Yeah,
sodium dense. The beef that's in it, beef just takes longer to break down, so you're
yeah.
getting more
The
protein and
beef.
things like that. The
Yeah.
beef, yeah, the beef. So I don't frequent McDonald's very often, but as far as trail food, I think I had
Yeah.
is either 4 or 6. I don't remember exactly how many, but I had, let's just say, 4 or 6 double cheeseburgers that I kept in my sled. And then,
Yeah.
when you want some calories, you just reach in, unwrap the double cheeseburger, and then you just, depending on what time of day it is, it kind of freezes more. If it's during the day, you don't really have that much of an issue, but if it's at night, you kind
Mhm.
of, they call it, I just kind of stuff it in a pocket, maybe
Yeah.
10, 15 minutes beforehand, and I'll just shove it in my inner layer. And then after 10, 15 minutes, I'll pull it out and then start eating. I mean, it's not warm, but it's also not frozen solid either.
Yeah.
So that was definitely part of the strategy, was double cheeseburgers. So those hit the spot and kept me going. So that was one thing. I also did Gardettos. I did a bunch of peanut M&Ms. That was a big one
Okay.
because peanut M&Ms are super calorie dense, and I mean, for me, they taste amazing at any time. So
Yeah.
that's just one of those things that I can eat, without even thinking about. It's not going to be one of those like, oh, am I feeling this right now? The answer is always yes with with the
Yeah.
peanut M&Ms.
Yeah. I
I
mean, like
did
an
beef
energy
sticks.
bar or a candy
I
bar. I
don't
mean,
do
they're all
bars
frozen,
anymore.
right?
I just can't. I've done too many bars over the years where it's just my
Yeah.
body just, ugh, it
Yeah.
just makes me
Exactly.
nauseous just even thinking about it. So I didn't do any bars. I did a bunch of beef sticks. There's a really good meat locker that I kind of grew up with. It's called Holman Locker in
Mm.
Holman, Wisconsin,
Okay.
and they have some of the best beef jerky in the world. They've actually won like global
Mm.
competitions and things. So I got some of
Okay.
their beef sticks because their beef sticks don't freeze either. So
Okay.
I just got a bunch of those.
Mm.
What else? That was pretty much it. I mean, peanut M&Ms were a big part of the strategy. And actually, the first night I was talking to another guy and we were just going back and forth and we got to this little hill. We both ran down it and I had probably 2,000 calories worth of peanut M&Ms in my pocket and I was snacking on them and it fell out.
Ooh.
And they all dumped onto the snow at like
Ooh.
2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And he just like looks at me, he's like, "You gonna pick them up?" And I'm like, "I feel like I have to. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think there's an option not to. Like, this is
Yeah.
2,000 calories. I only brought like 8,000 total." So it's
Yeah.
like when you just drop 2,000, and that's a big part of your strategy is that, those peanut M&Ms. I was like, I guess keep going, man. I'll catch up with you.
Yeah.
And I sat there for 5 minutes just picking peanut M&Ms out of the snow. But when you drop them in the snow, they're all
Yeah.
wet. So you put them back in this baggie, and
Yeah.
it's just this like kind of messy color bleeding all over the place. Like it's all just this goo that it creates. But it's like, well, they're still the same, just they look a little less enticing.
I can relate when I backpack. I can't do the bars, but I carry Doritos,
Oh yeah.
which are high calorie, high sodium, which works
Yep.
out well. But every once in a while, I hit a branch and Doritos all over the
Oh
trail.
yeah.
Oh
Yep.
no!
Yep.
And this race, you have to finish with a certain amount of calories still in your pack, right?
Yep. And that's part of it too, is that there's the calories you plan on eating, and then there's the calories you plan on finishing with. So I probably
Yeah.
brought maybe a little bit over 8,000 calories total to actually consume on the trail. And then you have to have 3,000 calories of backup. That way, if
Mhm.
you get in trouble, you have to finish with, I think, 2 sets of hand warmers. You have to finish with your ID and insurance card, and you have to finish with at least 3,000 calories, and you have to finish with a pair of kind of deep winter mittens. These are all things
Okay.
they check at the finish line to make sure that,
Okay.
you finished. Not only did you finish, but you finished safely. So they ask you to pull
Sure.
out your calories. So I just did kind of the soft containers of like Jif peanut butter.
Okay.
So they're like a container, probably like, yay big, and has like a squeeze top on it. So I had
Okay.
1.5 of those, and those total 3,000 calories. So you just kind of shove those in the bottom of your
Yeah.
sled. You never plan on eating them.
Yeah.
Like the guy that I started the race with, Mike Copy, he's 74. He was going to be the oldest person to ever finish that race. He decided to go with butter. So he brought sticks of butter. I'm like,
Okay.
well, yeah, that's. I always think about, well, the what if. Like,
Yeah.
what if you get stuck out there? Do I want to be eating a stick of butter, or would I rather
Yeah.
be shoving peanut butter in my mouth? And for
That's
me, I'd
probably
rather do
frozen.
peanut butter.
More like licking a stick of butter, right?
Exactly. So I was like, I don't know if I'm in a survival situation, I don't think I want to be trying to, melt and lick butter. That's
Yeah.
just not gonna.
Yeah.
It'll keep you alive, I'm sure, for a while, but it's not going to be something you're going to want to do.
So also you're required to carry a GPS
Yep.
beacon, like a InReach or whatever. And the interesting part is if you don't finish with that thing charged, you get
Hmm.
penalized.
You do.
And the question is, how do you keep the battery and how do you keep that thing charged? Just with a power bank?
So actually, I didn't have to touch it. So this has kind of evolved over the years of this race. Is that used to have to provide your own GPS, and if you're using like a Garmin InReach Mini, a race like this in this type of cold climate, it's not going to last the whole thing. So you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to bring a power bank, or you're going to have to stop and charge along the way in order to make sure you finish the race. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now they use a tracking company for this, and you can still bring your own device, but most people opt to use their devices, just because of the fact that they will get through this race, and you don't have to spend, $200-300 on a GPS device that you maybe only use, once a year or something like that. So
Okay.
I think it's called Track Leaders is the name of the
Okay.
company, and then you just rent the trackers through them, and I think it's just a spot tracker. So it's
Yeah.
pretty basic. That's why it doesn't consume as much battery because it doesn't have a screen or anything. It's literally just one
Sure.
of those, you hold it, it turns on, and then you strap it to the top of your sled because it has to be visible to the sky. If it's in a pocket, it can kind of mess with some of the tracking on it. So
Sure.
you check in at the beginning of the race, you turn it on, they confirm it, and then you're ready to go. And that way, friends and family members can follow along during the race, which is kind of a cool aspect of it.
Yeah. I mean, so people can track you, but also just for safety, right?
For
So,
safety, for sure. So it's great to
yeah.
be able to follow up on people, but if somebody gets in trouble and they haven't moved in a while, it's great to know exactly where they are because,
Yeah.
the cell phone service is super limited out there. So if you get in trouble and it's in a spot where there's no cell phone service, you kind of have to just wait until somebody just goes to check on you. And there's the snowmobile trail, or the crews that are on these snowmobiles, they're great. They're going all times of the night. They'll just go by you, and then they just come by with a wave, and if you're in trouble, you just kind of like flag them down, and then they'll help you with whatever you need. And I actually
Okay.
had to use them this year because I had an issue with my sled.
Mm.
So my sled has kind of like some scallops. It's kind of like these folding pieces that kind of give it some structure and shape.
Hmm.
And it worked great in my training, didn't have any issues. But then I'm on the first night and I'm like, man, my sled is feeling heavy. It's just got drag. I'm like, what's going on? And I'm realizing that my sled is filled with snow.
Mm.
So I'm like, okay. So I take it, I shake it and dump it out and things, and like, okay, now I'm good. And then 5 minutes later, it's back full, and I'm like, what the heck? And your mind isn't quite 100% when it's 2, 3 in the morning. So you're just trying to rack
Yeah.
your brain, like, what's going on? I'm flipping over my sled. I'm like, I can't see anything, but it's just you had a headlamp on, so you're trying to figure out what the problem is. And after the third or fourth time of checking, I'm like, it's got to be in the back. It's filling up on this one side. Like, I got to figure it out. And then I realized one of the folds had caught on something, probably like a root or something. Because there's,
Mm.
the trail's kind of littered with like, brush and roots and things like that, especially
Sure.
in like a low snow year like this, where there's not as much snowmobile traffic. So it caught one of the folds, created like it bent it up.
Mm.
And so what it was doing is creating a shovel effect. So as I'm
Yeah.
pulling it forward, it's
Yeah.
scooping snow from the back, causing drag and filling up my sled and adding 20 pounds of snow to it. So I
Sure.
was trying to, fix it on the trail. I couldn't get it. I was trying to use my ski pole to like jam this, piece that was bent back in. And I got to this intersection, and one of the guys that was on the crew for the snowmobiles was at this intersection. And I'm like, you don't happen to have like, I don't know, a screwdriver or a pair of pliers? And he's like, yeah, just a second. He gets out a pair of pliers, flip the sled over, and then we start working on that piece, and we just bend it back the other way, and we got it to a spot where it was much better, where it wasn't creating drag. Now, it
Okay.
still was an issue during the race, just not most of the time. And what I mean by that is that one of the really fun parts about, pulling a polk sled, it's not fun to pull uphill, but it's great to ride down. So, when you're riding down these hills, the hills are probably the biggest shocker of this race, is that they're not super long, but they're super steep because they're not
Okay.
meant for people. They're not meant for foot traffic. They're meant for snowmobiles. So it's
Sure.
not graded. It's not, switchbacks or anything. It's just if there's a hill,
Yeah.
you're going up it. So when I would ride these down on the sled, you're putting all your weight on it, and then that part on the back of the sled would push down enough, and then it would scoop up snow. So every single time I, sledded down these big hills, my sled would fill back up with snow. So I get to the bottom, flip it over, I'd shake it out, and then I just keep going. But
Awesome.
super
Yeah.
fun to be able to sit down, cruise down these
Yeah.
hills. I mean, I hit over 35 miles an hour on some of these hills going down. So you're flying.
Yeah. Yeah. The only bad part about going downhill is, you have to go back up one, right?
You do, and that's the bummer, is that on this trail, it's like as soon as there's no break. It's like as soon
Yeah.
as you slide down one hill, you've got probably 100 yards or less before you're going up another one. So it's not like, oh, I got to this nice,
Yeah.
4 or 5 mile flat section. It's like, no, you're just going
Yeah.
up down the whole
Well,
way.
I mean, the first part of the race, isn't that a little bit flatter? And then
It is.
when
It
you're
is. So it's a nice
tired,
warm up. Yeah. So
yeah.
it's like you're like, oh, this isn't bad. You're talking with people. You're having a great time out there. And then you get to the night portion, and that's really where a lot of the elevation starts, is after the first aid station, and it's just kind
Okay.
of that shocker, like, oh, it's not going to be flat the whole time. And then that's kind of your introduction to the hills. And people
Yeah.
say that, and people said that, before I got into this race, and they're like, "Oh, just be aware of the hills." And then you look at the elevation profile, and you're like, "They're not that big. Like, what's
Yeah.
that challenging about them?" And then you get to them, you're like, "Oh, it's not about how long they are; it's
Yeah.
the how steep they are."
Yeah. Which,
So
I always look at the people who are riding bikes on this thing. And I'm like, man, that would be so much easier. Why does it take them so long? All they're doing is riding a bike. But I bet you it's those hills that
it's
kill
those hills, and they're too steep, so you can't, for the most part, you can't ride your bike up it. I mean,
them.
as
Ooh,
I was just about to the last aid station, I ran into this lady from Saskatchewan, and she was really struggling. Her husband had, I think, completed the race the previous year, so she wanted to go do it. And
mhm.
she was really struggling because she was pushing her bike up and down these hills. And she's
Yeah.
like, she was out of water. She's like, I hate to even ask you. She's like, do you have any water I can borrow? I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't take off my hydration vest, but I have this
Yeah.
extra, thermos. So I gave her what I had. And then kind of some of the hills, we were kind of side by side, and I'd kind of go behind her and grab her seat and kind of push it, because
Oh,
a polk
nice.
sled is hard to pull up, but
Yeah.
it's not as challenging as like a big, heavy, fat bike to try and, be on the side of it. So that's one of the great things about this race, is that even though it is a self-supported race, one thing that you can always utilize is the other people that are on the
Sure.
trail. So if you want to share calories, you want to share gear, if you want to help people during the race, that's something that
Yeah.
is encouraged, which is great to see in a race like this, and definitely beneficial in certain circumstances.
Yeah. I mean, those bikers are still carrying all that gear too. So their bikes aren't light when they're going
They're
back up
not
those
light.
hills.
They cruise down the hills, don't get me wrong, and the
Yeah.
flat sections are pretty easy, but I mean, even for bikers this year, the most challenging part about the 2025 year was the trail conditions. Because it was a
Sure.
warmer year, I mean, during the day it probably got up to around 30 degrees, and it was
Mhm.
single digits, maybe even, around zero at night. With the wind chill, it was definitely, in the negatives, but
Sure.
during the day, when you have these snowmobile trails and it's those kind of type of temperatures, you're not walking on, hard packed snow. You're walking on, in a sense, sand. So if you've ever run on
Mhm.
the beach or walked on the beach before,
Mhm.
it's rough. And when you do that
Yeah.
for, 100 plus miles, like it tears up your legs, it tears up your feet. And
Sure.
I had, it's such a buzzkill when you're out there and you hear the groomers, because there's snowmobile groomers that are out there. And I got to the halfway point, and I was feeling pretty rough. And it just, those thoughts are in your mind, like, can I finish? Can I finish this? Like, I'm
Sure.
70 miles in, but I'm feeling
Yeah.
just totally destroyed. So it's called Mel's George. It's a resort that's halfway. It's right on the side of a lake. So you cross this big lake, totally exposed, and you get to the other side, and then there's these resort cabins, and they rent two cabins there. So you can, you go inside, they'll cook you some grilled cheese and make you some soup. And then you can lay down too. So they have beds that are available. So
Sure.
I decided that I was like, well, if I'm going to continue this, I need to get off my feet. So, I slammed a couple grilled cheese, ate some soup, and then I was like, is there any beds available? And they're like, in the other cabin there is, but not in this one. So I was just tired. So I just laid on the floor for maybe 20 minutes. And then a person got up and they looked at me and they're like, you want the bed? I'm like, yep, I'm hopping in. So
Yeah.
I probably laid down for a total of maybe like an hour. I never slept. It was just one of those like, adrenaline's still pumping, you're
Yeah.
you're fatigued and sore and just I'm not one of those people that can sleep, any place anyway. So, you
Yeah.
will never see me sleeping really on an airplane or in a car or anything like that. I
Sure.
just don't have the ability. So in a race like this, I'm just not going to be able to sleep at all, unfortunately. But just getting off your feet for 2 hours is
Yeah.
such a huge thing for your body. So I got up and I was like, all right, my legs feel great. Let's go. 5 minutes after I get on the trail, I hear this, and this groomer comes behind me. And it's just one of those like, oh no. Because you know that the groomer is going to the end of the trail. So
Yeah.
it's not just like you're going to be stuck in this for the next couple hours. It's like literally the rest of the race is this mashed potato substance that
Okay.
they're creating. And it's just super fine. It's super soft. And your feet just sink in like,
Yeah.
3, 4 inches with every single step. So it just
So,
makes
yeah.
pace
So
brutal.
the trail was more compact before the groomer comes by, and that
Yes.
loosened it. Oh,
And it
you
has to
see,
do
you
with the
think it would be
conditions
the
too.
opposite,
So
but
typically, what I've heard is that when the groomer comes through, if it's a cold year, let's just say like minus 20 or below, the snow sets back up within about 40, 45
sure,
minutes. So
sure.
when it does that, it's like running on concrete.
Yeah.
Like it is like running on your sidewalk on your street because it's so hard and compacted. But in a
Yeah.
warm year where it's 30 degrees, once the groomer comes through, it never really sets up until at
Sure.
night and it drops to a low enough temperature where it can do that. And it was too warm to do that, so it just became this awful mush to walk through. So I typically don't get foot blisters, but I had blisters on probably 8 out of 10 toes at the end of it. And it was one of those like you take off your shoes and you know it's going to be
Yeah.
bad. You're just like not looking forward to taking your socks off. You're like, I got to do it at some point.
So you talk about your shoes there. I go winter camping and I wear boots, and I go
Mhm.
running and I wear running shoes. What the heck do you wear for shoes and clothing when you're you know running in negative degree and loose snow? What do you wear?
It Footwear is such a personal preference. There's no right answer. It's whatever works for you. So you'll see people out there with big boots. You'll see people with, basic trail runners that are not waterproof. You'll see people with, trail runners that are waterproof. You'll see snowshoes. There's all sorts of, things that people utilize. Sometimes people use vapor barriers. They're using vapor socks or we're using waterproof socks. So for me, I typically, hiking, running, things like that, I never go with Gore-Tex because Gore-Tex is just one of those things that if it fails or if you get it wet, drying it out is just a super big challenge. But in a race like this where you're not crossing streams and you shouldn't be really struggling with wet feet if you're doing it right. I decided to go with. I mean, I'm a big Hoka Speed Goat fan, so I end up getting a pair of Gore-Tex Hoka Speed Goats, and it kind of has like an ankle collar, so it goes up just a little bit in Velcro, so it kind of creates a seal along the top, so you're not having a bunch of snow come in and things like that. And then I wear two pair of socks. So I sized up a size and a half. So usually I wear kind of around probably around 11 and a half to 12, and I went with like a size 13 on this one. And so if I'd wear it normally, it just wouldn't fit right. But when you wear two pair of socks, you want to build in some room for that extra volume that those socks are going to take up. So I wear underneath those, I wear the Injinji toe socks, like the Ultra
Mhm.
socks. They're a little bit thicker, and then on top of that I wear a pair of like merino wool darn tough socks.
Okay.
So that's kind of my system is that I wear, toe socks, a little bit of a heavier pair over that, and then Gore-Tex shoe, trail runner over that as well. So
But
that
not
works
a
super
waterproof
well.
shoe.
It is a waterproof. I did go with
Okay.
Gore-Tex. So
Okay.
typically I don't, but for this race, I did a prep race. I did the St. Croix 40, which
Okay.
happened about 2 weeks before Arrowhead. and it's a night race. It actually starts at 6 p.m. and goes through the night. So it's a really good prep race for something like Arrowhead. It's
Mhm.
shorter, but it's on snow. You're pulling pulks. There's some decent elevation, and I just brought all the gear that I was going to use for Arrowhead. So it's a really good prep race, and that's really a good time to test a lot of your gear. I mean, I did a lot of miles, with that type of shoe system ahead of time too, out at Afton and on local trails around the Minneapolis area. But so I felt really good going into the race that my footwear was dialed in and it was going to do really well for me. But I still ended up getting blisters, even though typically I don't, because if you think about when you're on something like sand, you're
Mhm.
having to use your toes more because you're trying to grip, because every single
Mhm.
step you're sinking in. So your toes are just constantly gripping every single step. And when you do that over 100 plus miles, your feet just take a beating. So I just, even with, proper care and changing socks and things like that, it's just the conditions this year were just, destroyers for your legs and for your feet.
Yeah, and I mean sweat management is super important. What sort of clothes did you wear?
So you want to, at least for me, I want something that's going to breathe really, really well, because moisture management is such an important part of a race like this. So, what I wore for my legs, I just wore a pair of like thermal tights, and then I wore a pair of Solomon cross country skiing pants over that. So,
Okay.
what's great about cross country skiing pants, at least the ones that I have, is that they're windproof on the front, and then there's a layer of insulation, and then on the back, it's just kind of like a nylon kind of insulating material, but it's not windproof. So you get a lot of breathability through the back, and then windproofness on the front, which it definitely worked for what I needed in this race. So just two layers on the bottom, and then on the top I wore a merino wool base layer. So my company Evolve Supply Co. We make a merino wool sun hoodie, which is great for summertime, but it's also really good as a base layer. So I wore that the entire time. That was my main layer, and then I put my hydration vest over that. And then when it came to the insulating layers, I wore like an Alpha Direct fleece,
Mm.
just because those breathe super well. But when you put a layer over it, they insulate really well. So then it was actually funny enough, this was kind of my main outer layer, which is just a light fleece. So with those three layers, I found that until it gets below maybe like 10 degrees, that works for me, because it keeps me warm enough, but lets everything breathe enough to where I'm not accumulating sweat. So
Sure.
during the nights, I would switch over to more of a synthetic insulated puffy jacket, just
Okay.
because the temps are a little bit cooler. The wind picked up a little bit, so I wanted something that was a little bit more, a little more beefy to keep me warm. But
Sure.
during the day, just kind of three lighter layers that breathe really well, and that works super well.
So the race starts in the dark,
Hmm.
and maybe you can explain to me why they started in the dark, and just kind of go through the first part of the race and what your mindset is and what you're thinking.
Sure. So it starts at, is it 6 or 7? I can't remember. It's 6 or 7 a.m. So I mean, it's not really like a purpose that they start in the dark, but it definitely adds to kind of like we're out here. It's not daytime, so a lot of people use headlamps, but I mean, the sun comes up probably within the first hour of the race starting. So I just relied on everybody else's light. Everybody's pretty bunched up at the start, so it's a pretty fun atmosphere at the start of the race, just because everybody's hyped up. You've got this huge race ahead of you. You got a lot of miles, and then there's kind of three different waves. So they have the bikers out front, and then the second wave is the skiers, and then the third is the foot racers. So just because of speed, they want to kind of stagger it where people aren't going over each other and things. So once they start the race, or just before, they have a big fireworks show. So it's kind of great that it's dark out and there's a bunch of fireworks going off. Everybody's cheering, and then they yell, "Release the hounds!" And then they let the bikers go, and then they say, "Release the hounds" again, and then the skiers, and then same thing for the foot division. So it's a pretty exciting start. There's a lot of people and a lot of film crews and things, so it's a pretty cool start to the race. There's a lot of hype to it, and a lot of fun and excitement, and it's pretty awesome. But then you're into it, and it's everybody's pretty bunched up right away. So you're meeting people that you've never talked to before, but you find out that there are a lot of similarities for the people that do these type of races. They're just gritty people that do fun, hard things, and there's just you can instantly dive into a conversation with anybody that's out there. and you'll become friends within minutes. So it's pretty cool. That was probably one of my favorite parts about this race is the people, the people, the racers, the volunteers, the support crews. Like it's a really really cool environment to be a part of. So unfortunately, because there's so few people that do this race, if you're not keeping pace with somebody, you kind of get separated. So I started the race with Mike Copy, who I mentioned he was going to be the oldest person to ever finish this race. He's 74 years old, so not quite half my age, but dabbling in that realm. But he's just a total animal. I mean, he's completed I think double digits 200-mile races. So he's done like 11 or 12 200-mile races, at
Wow.
over 70 years old. So, I mean, talk about life goals. Like if I'm in anywhere close to that condition when I'm his age, like I'll consider that a huge win. So,
Sure.
I started the race with him, but his sled was quite a bit heavier. My sled was probably around 30 to 35 pounds at the heaviest, loaded up with water and things, but his sled was
Mhm.
55 pounds, a little bit over. So, he's
Okay.
almost double my age and he's carrying more than 20 pounds extra, and he quickly realized that our paces were pretty significantly different. So we stayed
Okay.
together for maybe the first, 15 miles or so, but then and we were kind of like I would slow down a bit, and then because he would run a bit, I would walk a bit, and then we'd kind of, catch back up. But it just became one of those that we just realized pretty quickly that we were going to finish at different times. So we ended up kind of, splitting up, and I mean, I probably spent 90% of the race by myself. So it's great to connect with people and talk with people, but
Yeah.
just little things happen where it's like if pace isn't lining up or you drop all your M&Ms all over the trail, it's like you kind of just, split up and everybody keeps, doing their own race.
Yeah. So you spent 2 nights out there, right?
Hmm.
So anything interesting happen when you're really fatigued and walking in the dark? Any mirages or anything?
No, I've only, really had some hallucinations one time, and that was when I did the Superior hiking trail. The last day, I was just so fatigued and so worked that I was seeing bunny rabbits and hundreds of deer, and like just I thought I was in a trailhead parking lot for like 4 hours. I just kept on seeing these lights, and when they're kind of going through the trees, you're like, oh, there's a truck over there that's in a trailhead parking lot. I got to be coming up to something, and you never got there. So I saw hallucinations during that. But, in a 2-day race, I guess maybe I can just handle the fatigue and the sleep deprivation well enough to where I don't experience that. They do try to encourage it a little bit, which is kind of funny because that's part of this race is that, you do get to this point of like tiredness where a lot of people, have hallucinations and things like that. So it was kind of funny. Before the last aid station, there's a company, I can't remember what they're called, but they do a lot of they make kind of like energy drinks and energy kind of goos and things, but it's all maple syrup based. So it's a Minnesota
Mm,
based company. I can't remember what they're called, but their mascot is a fox. So they had I think it was Robert Frost poems and a
okay.
picture of a fox. And it was like these wooden signs. So it was like this fox that's probably, I don't know, 3 feet tall. And then there was a board connected to it and it had like a Robert Frost quote on it. And
Okay.
these quotes were pretty, I mean, they were trying to, make you think that you were hallucinating because they were kind of these trippy quotes. And you're out there in the first one, you're like, why is there this fox and this weird quote that's on there? And then there's probably a dozen of them leading up to
Yeah.
this last aid station. So
Okay.
when you get there, they're like, what did you think of the foxes? And I was like, they were real, weren't they? So you're definitely like, I don't know. I was with it enough to know that this was like a real thing. But that's something that they tried to like kind of change up. And then you get to the aid station. And there's this guy wearing a head to toe fox costume, and he's just running around and like running up to people and acting crazy, and it's just part of the fun atmosphere and just little things that they do to kind of create these little situations during the race. So pretty fun, pretty fun. But I didn't have any major hallucinations or anything like that.
Okay. So I know a lot of people in ultra races have a support team or they have pacers. Did you have any of that or did other runners?
So it's not allowed during this race because of the distance and because of the kind of severe conditions. They don't want to be responsible for any type of crew or pacers or anything like that. So this is one of those racers where pacers are not allowed, or support crews. So when you get to these aid stations, you have to just rely on the crew that's there, that are volunteers in the race and things. And you can do one drop bag at Mel George's, which is the halfway point. But other than that, you bring everything with you, and then hope that that was enough. And if you need things at the aid stations, you can borrow things from other racers and so on, or you can take advantage of the food or the water that's there. But it's pretty minimal, so it's not there's not a ton there. So you really want to be prepared with everything that you're going to need in your sled. So that's one of the things that you can, if you were going to come back and do it again, you can do the race as it's kind of mainly structured as kind of like a self-supported type race, but you can also do it unsupported. And if you do it
Yeah.
unsupported, obviously, then you can't go into any of the buildings that are in the three aid stations. You can't warm up, you can't get water, you can't get any of the food because there's, some soups and grilled cheese and things like that that they'll make for you at some of the aid stations. But if you're doing it unsupported, it's totally on your own. So you have to check in at these aid stations, and a lot of people say like, "Oh, it's brutal because you can smell the grilled cheese just cooking, you can smell warm food, and you have to just check into the aid station and then you have to keep going." So a lot of times people will bring dehydrated meals or things like that, and then they'll go on maybe like a quarter mile past the aid station, and then they'll get out their bivy, they'll get out their stove, and then they'll boil
Mm.
water and they'll cook and things like that around the aid stations, which is always kind of a best practice because if you're doing these races, you're going to drop, you want to drop at the aid station. So especially if you're unsupported, sometimes when you stop is where you realize you're in worse shape than what you thought. So if you would go a quarter mile past the aid station, boil, get in your bivy for a while, and you realize like I can't continue, well, you're just going a quarter mile back to the aid station and you can just drop at that point. Because if you have to tap, in between aid
Yeah.
stations and there's a big blizzard or terrible temps, like you're kind of putting people in a position to have to rescue you, which is not ideal.
Yeah. In that movie about the race, one of the guys came into the aid station and they kind of convinced him that he should kind of hang it up there and not try to
Yep.
keep on going because he was hurting. And another one, you were talking about unsupported, and one of the guys was doing that, and he had a whisper light stove, and
Hmm.
it took him a long time to get that thing lit. And you
Hmm.
can imagine when you're tired, and you probably maybe can't feel your fingers, and the frustration of not being able to light your stove. Uh,
Yep.
I don't know.
It's
Uh,
brutal. I got to experience a
yeah.
little bit of that during the St. Croix 40, that prep race that I did,
Hmm.
because that one you start at night and it's there's two loops, and then the before you start the second loop, you have to boil a liter of water. So they have cold water, they pour it in your mug, and then you have to get that to a boil. And once they see a rapid boil, they're like you're good, and then you can utilize the water, and then you continue on for the second loop. Well, the temperatures weren't super cold. It was maybe around, 15 degrees during that race. So I just used a jet boil and a canister stove. And I know that with canister stove, especially like isobutane, the colder it
Hmm.
gets, the harder it is to light. But with those temps, I was like, oh, I've used it in these type of temps before. It shouldn't be an issue. Well, it was an issue, unfortunately. So I got to the halfway point. I had everything ready to go, screw on the bottle, and I light it, and it lights right away, and then it dies, and I light it
Yeah.
again and it dies, and it just keeps doing that. I'm like, oh my gosh. So the good thing is that there's a big fire that's there. So I got it close to the fire, got the canister close to it, obviously in a safe distance, but warm enough, close enough to where I'm going to get a lot of the warmth from the fire, and then just had to bring the canister up to a better temperature, and then I was able to get a boil. But that probably cost me 15 minutes at the halfway point during that race. So it was definitely one of those like, oh well, that would stink at Arrowhead if this happens. So that's why I switched over to the what was it? The cubes. What are those called again?
Oh,
I'm
the
blanking out on
Nesbit
that. Yeah, so that's when I switched over to the Esbit fuel system, just
Nesbit.
because that'll
Yeah.
light at any temperature. It's not super efficient, but if you're in a pinch and you need to melt snow, it'll work. It
Yeah.
just won't be the fastest.
Okay. So you've been done for the race for a few weeks here, kind of recuperating. The big question that everybody wants to know: are you going to do it again?
I won't say no, but I won't say yes. I know myself well enough to know that, if I'm completely checked out and I'm done with something, like I'll pretty much know it right away. But if there's some part of me that's like I could go back, or maybe I would go back and try it unsupported or something like that, that's definitely a possibility. And who knows? I mean, there's also a special way to complete the race too. It's called the Atois, and then you complete it in all three disciplines. You complete it on a bike, You
Oh,
complete it on foot, and you complete it on skis. So if you do all three of those in separate years, you kind of get a special trophy and things like that because you did it in three different disciplines and completed it 3 different years. So it's always that possibility. But again, I'm not, when you finish a race like this, that's as brutal as this race
yeah.
was, you're not chomping at the bit to line it up again. I mean, I was talking with Jake Heggie, who's a friend of mine, and he owns the course record for the Arrowhead on foot. He did it in
Mm,
just over 28 hours, which is
okay.
insanity. Like he just ran the whole thing.
Yeah.
And having gone through that now and recognizing the time and the the effort he put in to put down that time, like I reached out to him a little bit, or he had commented on a post that I had put up, and he's considering going back, but he did it 2 years ago, and he's definitely not going to do it for the next 2 years. So maybe it'll be one of those you take a few years off and then kind of reevaluate and then go back. But like I said before, ultra running and things are not forefront of what I do all the time. So
Sure.
it was fun. It was a great experience. But I'm not chomping at the bit to go back and do it right away. But you should.
Don't encourage me. But uh, so you finished in a little over 47 hours, and if you do the math, yeah, I mean, your pace was a little under 4 miles per hour.
Hmm.
But I mean, you factor in the aid stations and resting. I mean, what was your pace when you were moving? When we say running a race, I mean, you're not running the whole time.
No, and actually with this one, I have a tendency that I've learned with ultra races that I go out hot. Like I go out and I'm at the front of the pack. And when I did the St. Croix 40, I was the leader. I was
Mhm.
the first person out there, and after about 10 miles of, being out front, or actually slipped to about second, probably within the first 5 miles. But my focus was Arrowhead, and I knew that with
Yeah,
Arrowhead, I probably wasn't going to do much running. So I made the decision to slow down and just kind of do like a fast hike, just because that's what I was using that race for, was prep. And if I'm going to run the whole
sure.
thing, I risk, getting injured or, working different muscles that, you wouldn't if you were doing more of a fast hike. So after talking to quite a few people that had completed the race before, I was like, my goal is not to set any records. My goal is just to finish. This race is a beast, and I don't want to, burn myself out and get halfway through and then tap or something like that. So my goal was just to finish. So I knew I could, if I kept just kind of a fast hiking pace, I probably 3.8 to 3.9 was probably average for my moving pace.
Hmm.
And I rarely ran. So I ran a few times, but then definitely where you pick up the most paces going down some of the hills. So
Sure.
that's super fun because if sometimes people are not comfortable with it. One of the guys that I ended up catching at the last aid station, he was ahead of me the whole race, but he was
Mhm.
from Alaska, and he said that he was really nervous. He's like, I don't feel comfortable sliding down these hills. He's like, these are scary. I'm gonna go into the woods and crash and get hurt. I
Yeah.
slid. I mean, there's something like 48 hills or something like that, like big hills that are
Mhm.
sleddable, and I slid every single one of them. And it was a blast. And I know I made
Yeah.
up time on him, and probably that was a big reason why I caught him at the last aid station, because we were probably similar in pace, and he was running more than I was, but I just kept maybe more of a consistent pace. I, took advantage of all the hills when I could. And
Sure.
then the last aid station, that's usually kind of my mentality, is when I get to the last aid station, a lot of people are really struggling at that point, and they spend a lot of time at that last aid station just kind of like getting themselves in a mental space to like go out and hoof the last section. And the last section is only like 22 or 23 miles.
Only. Yeah.
But I was at the perfect point of like caffeination. I took like a caffeine pill maybe like an hour before the last aid station. So I had that like, okay, I can do this. Like I'm feeling good. So I spent maybe 12, 13 minutes at the aid station, and just I grabbed a thing of tea, I filled up my water, and I was gone. And there was people that were, there's probably 6 or 7 people that were already there when I got there, and I bypassed all of them and then finished ahead of them. So that's usually my mentality in ultra races. If at the last aid station I'm feeling really good, I almost just don't even stop. I just kind of blow through it, and that's where I can make up a lot of time, is kind of that last leg. But the last leg is brutal. It's all flat, but
Yeah. Yeah.
you asked me about hallucinations. I don't know if it was a hallucination, but I definitely had some weird stuff happen with my watch. Like my watch was amazing, like but it buzzes every mile. Right.
Okay.
So I got to the point where I had 10 miles left, and I looked at my watch and I'm like, okay, I'm at mile, I'm at 125. So I got 10 left, and I'm not listening to anything. It's the middle of the
Yeah.
night. So like there's not a lot to do. So there's a lot of, time in your head, but you can
Yeah.
also keep track pretty well when your watch buzzes. So
Yeah.
I'm going along and I'm like 10, I'm like 9, 8, and I'm counting down and I get to like 4. And I was like, sweet, 4 miles left. I was like, we're ending at a casino. Like, I feel like I should see more civilization. Like, I don't see any
Yeah.
lights. I don't see any sign of life anywhere. And I should be within 4 miles. And I was like, okay, I gotta look. And I look at my watch and it still had 8 miles left. And I'm like, how am I off by half? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I
Yeah.
counted every single buzz and I counted down to 4 and I was still at 8. I'm like, I'm losing my mind here. So like that last section just was playing mind games with me. It felt like it took forever to
Phantom
complete 22
buzzes.
miles. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. So I don't know if you want to call that a hallucination, but I
Yeah.
definitely was was struggling a little bit, and it definitely ticked me off when you see that your counting
Yeah.
has been so far off. You're like, oh, I don't have 4 miles, I have 8 miles to go, and that is a
Yeah.
lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially after going, what, 120 miles or whatever.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. So when you think you're at the end, and then you look and you're like, no, you're not. And you're like,
yeah.
oh, like another 3 hours, cool.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I used to run marathons and they'd have the mile markers at every mile. You're swearing, between mile 22 and 23, you ran like 4 miles.
Oh, sure.
They
Yep.
just seem farther apart.
Yep.
All right. So we're going to wrap up here a little bit. Everybody should check out your YouTube channel, which is Juice's Journeys. Is that
Yep.
right?
That's it. That's it.
And it's mainly backpacking on there and not ultra racing.
Yep.
But any other socials they should check out, Instagram or
I do
anything?
a little bit on Instagram, so I think it's Juice Hikes on Instagram, but that's pretty much it. I don't do a lot on social media, but
Yeah.
I'm on there and I post some pictures and videos every once in a while. But yeah, if you're looking to check out more of, what I do and things, definitely Juice's Journeys for YouTube and then Juice Hikes for Instagram.
And you're also good buddies with Darwin, right?
Yep. So own Evolve Supply Co. with Darwin on the trail, or Nick is his real name. So yep,
Okay,
get on some adventures with him as well.
good. Yeah, so check out Juice on his YouTube page. After you're done doing that, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification on this page. Subscribe, watch the videos, check out Instagram and Facebook. Hey, Juice, thanks for coming on the video here, and thanks for the advice on the trails. And a little surprise here, I'm going to be trying a couple ultras myself, which
Nice.
you've kind of given me a little coaching on, but we'll see
It's a
what
slippery
happens.
slope, slippery slope. So we'll see next year or 2026, 2026, 2027. You'll have to toe the line at Arrowhead.
Yeah, we'll see.
You can do
All
it.
right. All right. Thanks, Juice.
Thanks for having me on.